Let's begin our service with our opening prayer. As we invite God to surround us here in this service, let the love of God come to each of us, to touch each of our hearts and souls. Let each of us feel the joy that God can bring to uplift us. We invite our divine Creator through that manifestation of Spirit that we know as our comforter and friend, as we experience our earthly presence. Let us invite that infinite intelligence that we call the spirit world to gladden and bring upliftment and joy to our hearts and our souls. And let us feel that power of love that can surround us, so that when we listen to the words and the communications from Spirit, we can be reminded once more that we are eternal and that we are inspired in our lives by those that walk beside us each day. And let us invite those voices from beyond the stars to join us here today. And let us hear that which is silent, see that which is invisible, and let us touch that which is ethereal, so that we can be reminded once more that life is everlasting and that we are one. Amen.
Okay, right. Today's reading is from a book called Amicable Spiritualism by Sidney Pickersgill, and it is called Life. What is life? I was told at an early age that life is what you make it, and that this life is a period of time in which we, as individuals, should try to progress. The things that we experience should be as a lesson to be learned. So we could say life is a teacher. In life, we experience love, anger, sadness, and also joy and happiness. We also feel pain and disappointment. Yet God, in his wisdom, gave each one of us the ability to deal with life's problems. And if we had any difficulty, we could always take it to him in prayer. We are told that we learn by our mistakes. I sometimes wonder if this is true, as some people never seem to improve their lives. It is said that he who lives to serve glorifies living. He who loves life to purify himself in living. So whatever path you choose, remember always that it lies within you to accomplish all things. Don't let your background or your preconceived ideas, your present difficulties, your past failures, your self-doubts, or the opinions of others to keep you from becoming all God wants you to be. The potential that lies within us is limitless and largely untapped. Life means far more than many of us ever dreamt of. It is not merely passing through this earth life with all the comforts, enough food to sustain the body and clothes to keep us warm. Life on earth means that we should strive to bring into our lives the godlike image. We need never be anxious about our tasks in life, for every common walk of life is glorified with God's presence. The purpose of life from the spiritualist point of view is to seek from within, to discover the inner self and be true to thyself. All the happiness and success in life will come as a result of the discovery of the divinity within. Life is not a journey to the grave, but into eternity. Our earthly body may be totally worn out, but when disposed of, it will reveal the real person that you are. Thank you.
Take us back to 1863, when Andrew Jackson Davis, who's one of spiritualism's probably greatest pioneers, if you may have heard of him, you may not, but he was one of the people who wrote many books through his visits to the spirit world, which he called Summerland. And he began his journey through hypnosis and mesmerism. And he would describe himself as relatively uneducated. In fact, I think he only had a few days of schooling in his entire life, but he went on to write probably tens of books, probably hundreds even of written pamphlets and words. And he's often cited as being the heralder of modern day spiritualism, because when the Fox sisters brought through the wrappings, that very day he was heard to have said, "Behold, there is a living example." So he's cited with many, many things, and one of our very early pioneers, before even the concept of the Spiritualist National Union had even entered anyone's conscious mind. But what he did was, in his visits to the Summerland, he witnessed quite a lot of amazing things. And one of them is one that I would like to focus on this evening, is where he saw young people or young souls, and he witnessed them being taught by more experienced souls. And he observed what he called schools, spirit schools. And it was a place where spirits could go, perhaps from their experiences on earth or whatever. They needed to take that time. They needed to explore what love, what life was all about, what was the meaning behind their experiences. And he brought that back, and he created what he thought was the idea of teaching children, teaching young people how to understand spiritualism, or what this new way of thinking and believing was all about. This idea that all of us can speak and hear and connect with our loved ones and the spirit world, which is quite a radical and forward-thinking idea. And he wanted to bring that idea to young minds, which at the time, as you can imagine, would have met with great derision, a lot of opposition. So he had a lot of things to deal with. But he started writing about his experiences, and the way that the children or the young souls were taught was not through the classic Victorian style that he'd experienced in his 2 or 3 days of schooling, which was this telling and rote learning. It was more a free expression of learning by experience, learning from mistakes, learning guidance from each other. So rather than there being a teacher as such, there were guides, there were people that were helping people to understand and make sense of their experiences, which was quite different and quite radical, which today might sound quite ordinary, but in 1863, that was quite something. That was quite radical, because in those days, people were told how to think. The orthodoxy was very much about, this is how things are. These are the rules of society. And of course, there wasn't a great deal of encouragement to challenge those ways. And then as we come through towards the latter part of the 1800s into the 1900s, some of you may have heard of Alfred Kitson, and he was perhaps a little bit more modern day, perhaps taking us through into the up to the 1940s. But what he did was he was instrumental in beginning the Lyceum Manual, which some of you may have heard of. And this manual was written in such a way as to be a blueprint for how to help young minds find out about spiritualism. In other words, how to find out what they truly are, i.e., eternal beings who have that spark of divinity within them. And so what that manual set about doing was opening up people to a new way of thinking, a new way of experiencing God, the divine, and what really was then becoming a more structured way of considering what spiritualism was, because we were then starting to have ideas about our principles, which we've heard at the beginning of this service. And one of the things that I think about sometimes is when a child is born, when each of you were born into this world, and all of us here have had exactly that same experience. We were all born into this world. We all, if we listen to a lot of the people that bring through spirit guidance, spirit philosophy, they tell us that we choose to come here. We choose to experience this physical life. And quite often, a lot of the spirit philosophy will say how much those in spirit admire us, how much they look at us in such esteem for actually coming here, because they know how tough it is to be in this physical world. Because when we come here, we give up our memory of what we are, what we truly are, our spirit, our communication with the divine. And the whole idea that Andrew Jackson Davis had, and then later Kitson, was to help people to remember and to start with the young minds. And I'm always minded of that story of The Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy opens that door. You may have seen the film or read the book, and it's a fantasy film where she arrives in this place called Oz, and as she opens the door of the farmhouse that has landed in this magical place, she says to her little dog, "I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore." And of course, that may well be how it feels as a new soul entering this world, because we come from spirit, we come from a world of pure love, of pure connection. And to enter this physical world has to be quite a shock, no matter how much preparation we make. And so everything we can do to help those young minds adjust, to make sense of what it is, this physical life, but also what we are and where we have come from. And the whole idea that Andrew Jackson Davis was to encourage what's called the free child, this free expression, to remove dogma, to actually allow people to create their own belief systems, their own ways of thinking about things through guidance, through this philosophy of being kind, being loving, being aware of who and what we truly are. But as we go through this world, because often what can happen is we start to be influenced by parents, by families, by schools, by experiences. And so a lot of that novelty, a lot of that sort of, that feeling of this isn't Kansas anymore, can actually then become adapted, and it becomes directed by those around us. So we may start to take on, or we may find ourselves taking on belief systems or dogmas or certain prejudices. And we may sometimes hear ourselves saying things like, well, you would have thought, or people would, or we should, or we must. And of course, when we hear ourselves saying those kind of things, it's often good to question ourselves, where have those beliefs and ideas come from? Because I don't know about you, but what I found about my journey into spiritualism was having to start detaching myself from some of those old belief systems, some of those old prejudices, some of those ways of being, or those ways of seeing the world that I was taught as a child and as a young man growing up about how things should be, how we should behave, what we should believe about certain cultures or certain other people. And my view is that as we travel through this world, we have a choice. We can either continue to build on those prejudices, those adapted ways of thinking, perhaps those things that help us to survive, but perhaps don't really help us be connected to that loving being that we truly are. Because I believe that each one of us and each one of you here is pure love. That's what you are. It's just that through our journey in this world, we can sometimes get a little bit detached from that. We can start to lose our way a little bit. Like Dorothy did on the Yellow Brick Road, she had to find her way home, and she met many people, had many adventures, and very much that's what life can be like. But of course, she had one goal in mind, which was to get home. And I think ultimately that the goal of spiritualism is ultimately quite simple. It's simply to remind ourselves and reconnect with knowing and believing that each of us here is simply a loving spiritual being, that we are not this physical body. We are not these physical experiences we have here. And the whole process of spiritualism is a process of helping people, if they wish, to explore and uncouple from some of those old beliefs. I call them old beliefs because we have to remove them. We have to disassociate ourselves from some of them so that we can take on new ones, new ways of thinking, new ways of being. And some of you may have read the Lemony Snicket books, which are sort of modern day philosophy. And one of the quotes in there, and I'll just read it to you, and it says, "Love can change a person the way a parent can change a baby, awkwardly and often with a great deal of mess." And of course, I think what that recognizes is that our journey into discovering our true loving nature can be messy, it can be challenging, it can be difficult, but that doesn't mean that we need to give up. In fact, it means that perhaps we may want to just explore further. And I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying it won't mean that we have to reveal perhaps things about ourselves that we may not like, but we may sometimes, it may be helpful to explore those things, to reveal them to ourselves so that we can truly, in a way, uncouple ourselves from them, so that we can become more of this free, exploratory child that Andrew Jackson Davis had in mind for all of us. Because even though Andrew Jackson Davis was talking about the Lyceum movement and young minds, there is, of course, a child within each of you. And that child is still there. It still needs nurturing. It still wants to grow. And so even though we may be talking about something about ideas of working with young people, we still have that young, youthful element within inside of each of us. And it is about touching that loving soul that each of us truly are, through humor, through having some fun, through problem solving, working out what is going perhaps wrong in our lives. What do I need to change? Do I need to change my thinking? Is it to do with my belief systems? Is it something that's holding me back because I'm still holding on to that belief from childhood? And is it okay to feel? Is it okay to express emotions? Because quite often through our childhood, we can sometimes be told to keep our emotions in or to control them. But of course, The free child just wants to express those emotions, how we feel about things, and just to see how then that opens up us. And perhaps to explore what we value as opposed to more of what we fear. Because if we focus on more what we value, the fears can and do simply slip away. They almost become irrelevant sometimes, because if we focus on what's important, quite often the fears don't often need to be dealt with as overtly as we might think they do, because they can suddenly become, well, what was all that about? Because now I'm focused on what's important in my life, which essentially is connecting with that true loving being that you really are. And so any which way you can do that is the way forward, is the way into spiritualism. It is, in essence, it can be that simple. I'm not saying it's easy, and I know it can be challenging, but it sounds simple. But it is a process, and it may just take us time, but we are a work in progress. And of course, we do have our seventh principle of spiritualism, which is eternal progress is open to every human soul. And of course, the more of that exploration of your true loving nature that you do here, all the better. And of course, you can carry that on in the spirit world, but to do it here in this physical world with all its challenges just means how important and how valuable those experiences will and can be when ultimately we take them back to the world of spirit. And imagine those schools in the spirit world that Andrew Jackson Davis witnessed. Imagine when you go back to that spirit world, imagine you taking back your learning and you sharing that in those schools, because that's what it's all about. Those spirit schools welcome people from this physical world to share their experiences, to share their knowledge of what they've learned in this physical world. And that helps everyone learn what the true meaning of being a loving spiritual being is. And of course, ultimately, we are here to experience that love. And I'd just like to finish by reading you the last paragraph from the Philosophy of Spiritualism by the Spiritual National Union. And it's the last paragraph in the book, and it's regarding the seventh principle, the eternal progress being open to every human soul. The hope that is expressed for us in the wording of eternal progress open to every human soul is shown in the love of God and his understanding of our needs. He knows that we are not perfect and that we have stumbled many times on our earthly pathway. But equally, he knows that we have the ability to improve and make good the soul and spirit we are. His trust in us will never fail. Let our confidence in him be foremost in our thoughts and in our lives. God shares so much with us. Now is the time to respond.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So let us join together in our closing prayer as we praise and give thanks to God and to the spirit world for their true devotion, for that communication from that world that we call the spirit world. We give thanks to those softly spoken words and those gentle words of encouragement, to those that are most in need, so that we are consoled by the presence of spirit. And of course, as always, we are reminded by spirit that we are eternal. As we allow that light to shine upon our paths, let it illuminate each of our footsteps as we go on our way today. And thank you for the guidance, the words, and thank you for sharing the world of spirit here today. And let us welcome the healing that always takes place in these services as we all move forwards and continue our journey and the experience of oneness with the divine and that presence that enables each of us to know that we are eternal. Amen.